Wilson Center. A hearty welcome to all of you to the official and national memorial to our 28th president. We're a public-private institution, and we like to do the deep dive on key public policy issues. So this meeting today, weighing benefits and costs of military action against Iran, is very much one of those issues. My duty is very simple. I'm going to introduce Ambassador Bill Luers. Before I do, I just want to welcome Ambassador John Limbert and his students from the Naval Academy that are here today, and a hearty welcome to all of you from that class in the audience. Ambassador Bill Luers was a public policy scholar here. He's been working for some time on a book on dealing with the enemy. His career is fascinating. 5 years in the armed forces, and he had 31 years in the Foreign Service, including 2 stints as ambassador to Czechoslovakia and Venezuela. He then had 13 years as president of the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City, and then 10 years running UNA USA. That's the United Nations Association of the United States. The last 3 years, he's been working on this Iran project. Ambassador Luers, welcome back to the center. Good to have you back.
Rather than me talk about it, maybe we could have a moment of silence for the terrible disaster to the Americans in Libya yesterday. So. Thank you. Mike, thanks for the introduction. Did you leave? You're still there? You're in the back? Okay, thank you for that. And thanks for all your friendship over these many years. And the Woodrow Wilson Center for the incredible support they've given this project and your willingness to have us launch it here, because it is recognized in this city as a place where you can do most anything. And you're not, it's not partisan, and it's known for its independence and strength as an intellectual institution. And thank Jane and Harmon and Lee Hamilton, who brought me here last year. Before I start anything, I want to thank our team. Iris, who's my colleague, who is working with me, Iris Bieri, in the Loran project. Sally, who's a recent hire, whatever she's doing. She's advising Sally Donnelly on so many things. Where's Sally? Anyway. And Joel Rubin, who is working with Plowshares on the Iran Strategy Group. I just want to tell you a little bit about the Iran project, those of you who don't know about it, and we haven't been terribly public about who we are. It really began when I was at UNA USA some years ago, and Tom Pickering was chairman of the board, and Stephen Heinz, who was head of RBF, who couldn't join us today, and I had the bright idea of beginning a back channel work, a Track 2 program with Iran. We did it, we started in 2002, and in many ways with Bill Miller and a few others and Jim Walsh, we have been in this process, and it's shifted over the years from Track 2 to really sort of working with both governments, and in the last 6 months we've been spending a great deal of time trying to figure out how we can go public with what we know. And we've always tried to be as neutral as we can. We have one thing, which is we're promoting U.S.-Iran direct conversations is what we're seeking. And we'll be doing 3 or 4 papers over the next several months. And this is the first one, and we think the most important. The purpose of this paper, as Tom will tell you, is not to take a position. Our purpose is to try to get a sensible discussion about one of the most important national security issues we face. So we contracted Austin Long, who's a professor at Columbia, and who's perfect for us because he's so knowledgeable, so thorough, and completely non-ideological. He wanted to get the facts out. Then he gave us a paper which I and Tom reshaped to some degree to achieve our goals in terms of the structure of it. And then, let me tell you, these 35 people who were involved, none of them, not one of them, is shy. And so the last 4 or 5 months have been spent, and I have talked to virtually every one of them, or emailed with them, or on the phone. And in the process, one could argue that we've written a report by committee. But I like to think of it as a report by a community of people who care about this country, who care about our national security, and who don't want us to blow it. No member of the committee who signed this is opposed to the use of military force if we have to. But most people, including many of the military officers who signed on to this, are concerned about the consequences of not thinking through what might happen if we were to use military force. So you will find no recommendations in here for you to follow. You'll find a lot of information with lots of footnotes, and we've tried to be as factual as we possibly can. Your panel this morning this afternoon is headed by Tom, who has been a partner of mine in many things since 1970-something, 3. And we have worked very hard with Jim Walsh, over the last 4 or 5 years. We've written a great deal, and we've published a lot, and we have learned to work together. But the incorporation of military officers here, represented by Frank Kearney, Lieutenant General Kearney, and so many others who joined this, has added a new dimension both to the complication of our clear thinking, but also incredibly profound changes in some of the approaches we've taken. It's been a really impressive partnership, and we've learned a lot in the process. Jim, who was speaking first, is on the faculty of MIT, Security Studies program. He's one of the rare experts in nonproliferation who's visited both North Korea and Iran, and he's very active in public publishing, and he's a star on Fox News, which tells you something about Jim.
That's why we never see you.
I know. Now, you're not supposed to be political here. Oh, okay. And Lieutenant General Frank Kearney, 35 years in the Army in Special Operations. He was commander of Theater Special Operations Command of CENTCOM, a regional planner supporting CENTCOM, and Deputy Director of Strategic Op Planning for the National Counterterrorism Group. He's been a valuable partner for us. Tom, if anybody here doesn't know Tom, you should just leave right now, because you're not going to get anything out of this meeting. But Tom was Deputy Undersecretary, Ambassador to most of the countries in the world, and including Israel, and unusual combination of regional and military expertise. So Tom, take over. Okay? You can just...
Bill, let me thank you very much. You've left me with nothing to do. You've introduced the program. You've talked about the paper. I'm going to do my best to be as brief as possible. I'm going to do 2 things. You've heard from Bill, but you haven't heard enough about Bill. Bill has been the mainstay of this effort since 2002. When all else was failing, Bill kept the light alive. When it looked impossible, Bill helped us find a way through. And he has been the recognized leader of this particular activity. And today's paper owes as much to Bill as it owes to anybody else. Secondly, 6 months ago, Bill and I were worried, along with others, about the quality of the non-debate on the use of force, or the potential for the use of force against Iran. We thought it would be useful and at the same time strikingly unusual in this very partisan town if we produced a paper that went to the facts, that made no recommendations, that took no position, that had enough faith in you, the readers, to understand that you would make up your own minds about the difficult decisions that the President of the United States will have to make in dealing with Iran. And that's what we have produced. I'm delighted that Jim will lay out for you critical elements of the Iran nuclear program and that Frank will talk to you about the military aspects and the consequences. And without further ado, Jim, take over, please.
Thank you, Tom. It's great to be here. I've already messed up the mic. I'm going to speak for just a few minutes, just so that we're all starting from the same set of fundamentals about Iran's nuclear program, that we have a common understanding. Obviously, why there's talk about a potential use of military strikes is a concern about the nuclear program and the consequences of that program. So it makes sense to start there. Now, again, I'm only supposed to speak for a couple of minutes, and that's to your advantage, because normally that's the sort of response I get over an extended period of time. I'm first going to begin with just the basics. You know, this is a program that is not new. It really started in the mid-1980s. It sort of stumbled along into the 1990s, and then in the late 1990s began to pick up speed. It's been fits and starts, but since the early 2000s, it's become an established program, expanding, improving, with each IAEA quarterly report showing new centrifuges built, new material being produced. So it's established. It's not going anywhere. And I would expect it's going to continue as is. Important to emphasize that IAEA does not have full access over everything in Iran, but it has access to the most important facilities in Iran, which is to say the things we're most concerned about, and the thing we're most concerned about is enrichment facilities. So even in that underground facility at Fordow, the one that's buried several hundred feet underground in concrete, IAEA is there and reporting on it. It's there, it reports every 3 months, but it's there virtually constantly with SEALs and monitors and inspectors keeping track of how those centrifuges are being used, how many are running, what are they producing at the levels that they're being claimed that they're producing at. So no one wants Iran to have, or very few people want Iran to have centrifuges or enriched material, but the good news is all of that is under IAEA inspection. You probably saw the most recent IAEA report last week, and the IAEA is in meetings in Vienna this week, the General Conference. The report, despite some of the breathless news stories that came out before it was released, when it was released, it was sort of consistent with most of the other reports we've seen. That Iran continues to install centrifuges. It seems to have put most of its effort in this last 3 months in that underground facility, which can hold up to 3,000 centrifuges. It had about 1,000 in it. Over the last 3 months, it put in another 1,000. Hasn't turned them on. They've been installed, but they're not working yet. But it's clear that they put the priority in trying to finish putting the maximum number of centrifuges in that facility, which is around 3,000. There were no real game changers in that report. Iran continues to have problems with its advanced centrifuge design. It has made bold claims in the past and it hasn't gone anywhere. It continues to enrich material, continues to produce 20% enriched material. And at the same time, while it's produced the 20%, which people worry about because that gets you much closer to bomb-grade material than you would otherwise be, they seem to be taking some of it offline. And so that the net result is a pretty stable level of 20% enriched uranium, which is the good news part of it. And we'll just have to wait and see what the future portends, how they handle that going forward. Future, I expect the challenges the regime faces with this program are resupply, getting the spare parts that are necessary and making fuel for the Tehran research reactor. But I just see sort of the past as a good predictor of the future in this case, steady improvement, no big game changers based on what we've seen over the last 3 years, nothing that would predict something big that would change something in the future. So that's the program, but what are the intentions of the program? In what ways are weapons ambitions related to this? I follow the lead of the Directorate of National Intelligence, who oversees all 16 U.S. intelligence agencies. In a recent testimony before the Senate Armed Services Committee, Chairman Levin said to him, "I read that Iran had not made a decision as of this point to restart its nuclear weapons program, had not made a decision to restart what it had stopped in 2003. Is that correct?" Mr. Clapper, "Yes, sir." "Okay, but what's the level of confidence that you have that as of this time they have not decided to restart the program? Is that a high level of confidence?" And Mr. Clapper replies, "Yes, it is." And then he says, "Can we go offline? Do we have to talk about this in public?" But I put that up there. That's sort of the consensus opinion. They have not decided to restart their program that they had prior to 2003. Also, again, following the DNI's lead on this, Iran has the capacity to eventually produce nuclear weapons, making the central issue its political will to do so, My line about that is you can't bomb the knowledge out of their heads. So they know how to build a centrifuge, so they have a basic capacity, but they have not decided what they're going to do with that capacity. We assess Iran as keeping open the option to develop nuclear weapons should it choose to do so. We do not know, however, if Iran will eventually decide to build nuclear weapons. At this point, that is an open question. The issues of concern that the international community has, and let's be clear, Iran is in violation of its UN Security Council resolutions that has told it to stop enriching. It's clear that this is a program that is producing more enriched material that it would actually need for the program that it has, and therefore rightly raises suspicions about the program. I think the core issues are enrichment, because again, if you're going to make a nuclear weapon, you need one of two things. You need highly enriched uranium or you need plutonium. And how do you make highly enriched uranium? You do it with centrifuges, or at least that's how most folks do it nowadays. So the concern is their enrichment, and more importantly, whether they're going from an accumulation of low enriched material, enriched to 3 to 5%, or medium enriched material, this 20% enriched material that we've been talking about. That's a real concern for nonproliferation analysts, because they're afraid that if they have a large supply of 20% just sitting around, that might be more quickly converted to highly enriched uranium. Military studies issue, there are allegations that Iran is engaged not in nuclear work on nuclear weapons, but on other non-nuclear work that you would do if you wanted to build a nuclear weapon. Computer simulations and the like that would allow you to weaponize material, make it into a warhead and mount it, put it in a plane or put it on a missile. And that's one of the things that IAEA continues to address. Most of those allegations, however, refer to the past, not present, but I can get into that in question and answer. And then finally down the road, and no one's talking about it, we could in a year or so face another aspect that would be in the news, and that's its plutonium reactor, because if that reactor is completed, could raise an issue about whether Iran would also have plutonium, a second material that you could use to make nuclear weapons. One of the great things about this report is I think we try to identify areas where there's common agreement, where there are facts. IAEA has a lot of facts about Iran's nuclear program. But what's really good about this report is that it identifies the areas where there's uncertainty and where there's disagreement. And in fact, in the footnotes, we try to cite people who disagree with us so that the reader can go and look up alternative points of view. So we want to be clear that there are areas of uncertainty about Iran's nuclear program. Here are 3 examples. How long would the program be set back by military strike? We say 2 to 4 years by U.S. strike, but there are differences, and it depends on how much spare parts they have hidden, whether they're able to disperse the program if they get advance warning. These are things that we cannot know in advance. How quickly could they build a bomb if they decided to? Again, we use what I think are conservative and consensus estimates. And how would we have advance warning if that decision had been made by Iran to go nuclear? So I just want to flag these to let you know we don't know everything about this issue, and what we try to do is identify what we don't know, make our best estimate, put some parameters around it, and then point to the debate that people have about these topics. This is my last slide, and since I'm the nuclear person in the group, I don't know if I really meant to say that, I want to talk about the benefits, potential benefits and costs with respect to nuclear nonproliferation of a military strike. Now, there are benefits. The benefits include, obviously, that you might delay or damage the program, and then there are debates about how long that delay would be and what that would be worth. You could, by taking military action, send a deterrent signal to other proliferators, either in the Middle East or elsewhere, saying, well, if you try this, this is going to happen to you. So that would be a nonproliferation benefit, a deterrent signal, if it was interpreted that way. And finally, you reassure U.S. allies, the Saudi Arabias of the world, that no, we're not going to let adversaries develop nuclear weapons and threaten you. So those are all nonproliferation benefits. And then on the other side of the table, there are costs. Again, I want to emphasize that the DNI has concluded that Iran has not yet made a decision to build a nuclear weapon. So one of the nonproliferation costs is that they will decide to build a nuclear weapon after they're struck. And there's some historical data to support that. It would undermine the political coalition that the president has built to put pressure on Iran. I think some countries might start to walk away from that after an attack. And it might put the U.S. in a difficult position globally in arguing for nonproliferation and greater nonproliferation commitments in an international environment that's already politicized, in which it's already hard to get countries to go along with us. It might make that more difficult. So, you yourself will have to weigh those costs and benefits and make your own judgments. But I promised Iris I would end on time, and I have 25 seconds to spare. So.
Thank you very much, Jim Frank.
I was going to stay seated, but I'm going to go ahead and follow the pattern of my colleagues up here. First thing I would suspect many of you are asking is why is a career special operations officer up here talking about what largely would be ballistic missile defense, a major airstrike from surface, naval, air platforms supported by cyber, very little potential special operations. I have spent since 2000 most of the last 13 years of my life focused on WMD as part of the Joint Special Operations Command mission, then with the theater operations that I did inside of the Central Command AOR, both in the war, but largely this issue loomed through everything. I've had the great opportunity to work for multiple Central Command commanders who spent a great deal of time talking with our partners in the region, and the great conversation was Iran and its growing rise in the region, as well as the nuclear capability that gave them the opportunity to be able to be a regional hedgeman. So as we take a look at the paper and you look at the costs and benefits of what military operations would do, one needs to also understand that military operations are probably the last option. That's when diplomacy, sanctions, and other things have failed to be able to adjust the behavior of the state and the participants in the enrichment process here likely in order to affect behavior and do things. And it is also unlikely, and the paper points this out very, very clearly, that we probably will not have rock-solid proof that there is a weapons program ongoing and they are moving towards weaponization. Now, so that leads to objectives. You know, for a military planner, the critical thing that we want to know is what is the end state? What is it you want military operations to achieve? And so we talk about prevention. Clearly, that's the term of art that's being used out there. We want to prevent Iran from achieving nuclear weapons capability. And then when you back off from that, after you do some destruction and you're able to stop that for a period of time, and as Jim said, you cannot kill the intellectual power regarded in this. I mean, the Iranians have moved along the nuclear pathway. They have scientists who understand how to do things. They probably have scientists who are out in schools around the world and doing things in laboratories back at home that are looking at how to better weaponize, how to improve missile guidance sets, how to improve fuel systems, how to build a package that would fit inside of a warhead that we can deliver. So there will be an experience base that strikes to prevent and strikes to delay will not have the same effect on, and then it comes down, as discussed, to the will of the state. What will they accomplish? The second thing is when you go to military operations, in order to be effective, to get in there and hit the 2 enrichment facilities, the 2 conversion facilities, the storage facilities, the missile defense systems that are out there, you will do damage to the Iranian defense capability, both as a means to gain access, but also as a byproduct, which will affect things that are going on in the region. And then lastly, as you move down that line, the law of unintended consequences will talk to us about, well, how well are we achieving our end states? Can we get there? And what opportunities come from that, both plus and minus from a military point of view? When we look at capabilities, what do we have and what can we do? And we look at our Israeli partners, not partners, but our allies, our friends who have a competing need as well. They believe this is an existential threat. We have 2 different sets of capabilities. The United States of America is the sole nation in the world who can put together the offensive, defensive, subsurface, surface, air, space capability to be able to move in and conduct strikes and do something about the problem in Iran. The Israelis have some capability to do things. I mean, they clearly have the electronic warfare capability, the air refueling, the strike platforms. Their weapons loads, however, are not the same. Their ability to repeat multiple strikes may or may not be the same when their desire to do so. And their effects on the facility at Fordow in particular, and on the multiple storage sites throughout a very, very large nation to have the same effects that the United States can have, I mean, is I think, without question and debate. And so for the Israelis versus the United States, the timeline to have effects before you achieve a level of enrichment in enough uranium to move to weapons grade production, their ability to do something about it comes earlier in the timeline than it does for the United States. And so what is the ultimate challenge here? Trust. trust between nations, trust between a nation and the world community is, will you take action? Will you prevent this from happening? And of course, it's a double-edged sword, because as we go down to the end of the line and maybe take action, it can be a catalyst for counteraction that may be worse than waiting and doing other things. So what do we have the capability to do? I mean, the United States clearly will take this with a great deal of experience. We've conducted large global operations and have strategic strike capability, the ability to move. We do not need to achieve strategic surprise to achieve end states, but we would prefer to have as much surprise as possible, because it will reduce risk, reduce loss of life, and reduce preparation on the part of an adversary. Clearly, we will want to deny them the ability to see where we are and what we were doing. We will take out C4I systems, command, control, communications, intelligence systems. We will take out integrated air defense systems. You can translate that all into time, space, platforms, synchronization, and so we can figure out the master air attack plan that will support an operation like that. We have a protection requirement. We have to protect our forces, who will be at standoff distances. We will have to protect our partners, who allow us to put ballistic missile defense systems in place on their soil and put them at risk for their participation in those things. And so we have this large set of capabilities that need to be arranged in time and space to be able to do things. And then if you do not get to choose the time and place of when operations begin, you come in at a level of preparedness along a timeline that you're just not sure when that will occur. Will some effort precipitate that? Will things in the Gulf precipitate it? So the capabilities difference, the trust difference, we can do those things. And where are we going to focus? I think the benefits as we do this is we believe with the ordnance we have and the ordnance we have tested, we will probably be able to penetrate the structure at Fort Al. The question will be to what degree and how much damage will be done to those facilities, and there's a great deal of debate about that. Natanz, the same thing. We will be able to go in there and probably do that damage, and I think we'll be able to damage most of the other sites. The amount of time that we have to do that will be determined by the conditions when we started and the global economic and political pressure applied against the United States and any other participants to end this as soon as possible. So from a benefit point of view, I think we can do what we're asked. We can neutralize, we can delay for a period of time, which will be subject to the conditions under which we started and under which we've finished based on political pressure globally. But we'll get the job done. Our Israeli partners will probably get less of a job done, but they'll do enough if they do it soon enough to be able to prevent low-enriched uranium from moving to the state that it needs to be used. Now, there are a laundry list of costs, and as I mentioned, I mean, it's not hard to figure out that the costs of taking military action when it's the last option to be able to push things forward are always a challenge. So you just have to look at the Straits of Hormuz. You have to look at the vulnerability of the oil infrastructure of our partners. You have to look at the ability of the tactical reach of Iran to attack allies, and in particular Israel. You have to look at the ability of them to use their surrogates in Hezbollah to attack regionally, to attack globally, to do things. We have the law of unintended consequences will come in with escalation. How do we know what will happen? When we reach an end state and we've achieved our military destruction requirements, does that mean this will end? How do we come to closure? How do we end this small conflict? How do we move to the next stage? And that will create another series of challenges, both economically and politically, to be able to solve the problems that are in front of us. I think from a military man's point of view, we don't want to get there unless we have to. We can do the job that we will have been asked to do. The question is, to what end, and what are the objectives of the nation, and will they change over time as we move through the military operation? And with that, I'll go ahead and take a seat and join the panel for questions.
Thank you, Frank, and thank you, Jim, very much. I want to wind up this portion with two very brief thoughts. One, I hope that you will look at this report. It's been 6 months in the making. It has the ideas of 30-plus very prominent Americans who've looked at the issue. And I believe, and I think that those of us who worked on it believe very much it will help to inform the debate. The report itself has an executive summary. It has a pretty good wrap-up right there, but it also conveys to you a series of shared understandings, which in fact are the premises of the report, something unusual in Washington. It provides much of the information that Jim and Frank provided you, both on the program and the kinds of military approaches that would be taken for a military action against Iran. It summarizes in a very clear way the costs and benefits. Just to keep those in mind, the potential with an air attack supplemented by other kinds of use of military force, a potential for a 4-year setback. With respect to other objectives, we believe very much, were we to attempt to find a way permanently end the program, it would probably involve a wholesale involvement of forces equivalent and perhaps larger than what we engaged in Iraq and Afghanistan, and certainly presence on the ground in a very serious way. But an attack would weaken the ability to rebuild nuclear facilities. It would certainly damage military capabilities to defend the program on the ground, as well as capacity to retaliate. And it would have broader geopolitical benefits for the United States in support of proliferation policy. Israeli airstrikes, in our view, as Frank said, would have a lesser capability, perhaps a 2-year setback. On the cost side, which are much more difficult to interpret because in many ways it depends upon how and in what way Iran chooses to retaliate. But certainly there would be, in our view, direct retaliation against the U.S. and its facilities, particularly in the region, and similarly against Israel. And Iran has the capacity of a few, but not an insignificant number, of ballistic missiles to do so. We addressed, as Frank did, the closing of the Straits of Hormuz. We think it's possible, but in a limited way. We looked at the costs of Iranian indirect retaliation, operating mainly through surrogates and through forces of its own that can operate in the covert environment. Here, too, there would be the likelihood of significant attacks against Israel, perhaps using the 50,000 weapons that Hezbollah, according to the Israelis, is supposed to possess. There would be covert retaliation worldwide, and certainly this would include American individuals and Israelis. My own judgment, and I think it's reflected in the report, is that whether Israel went alone or the United States went alone, both countries would be deeply involved in the retaliatory effort. And if anybody doubts the fragility and brittleness of the region, we only have to look at the events of the past 24 hours to understand how likely it is to respond in an impulsive and indeed severe way to attacks in the region. Beyond that, I think there are regional and global costs. Just very quickly, there could be, and probably would be, a breakdown in the solidarity the United States has achieved in the region and beyond, particularly over the use of sanctions against the Iranian nuclear program. There would be, as Jim pointed out, an increased likelihood that an attack might achieve the opposite result to the intended effort, that it might well cause Iran to say, look, we haven't made the decision, we've been attacked, we have to defend ourselves. Our first decision to do that is to make a nuclear weapon. Certainly there would be greater regional and global instability. One only has to look at the fragility and indeed the propensity of the oil price to anticipate and respond to political and indeed political, military, and security disturbances in the region to see the beginning of that. And obviously oil and energy will play a significant role in the recovery of the global economy, and so it could have an important effect on that. U.S. regional and global influence is likely to be impacted, and certainly many who think about regime change, in my view, ought to at least examine this with care as we did. I think our view is that the Iranian population, which may be skeptical about elements of its own leadership, is likely, in case of attack, as it did in the Iraqi attack in the 8-year war in the 1980s, respond in a way to rally around their government rather than to seek further ways, perhaps, to disturb it. And then finally, the obvious, but I think important also to mention, were there to be serious evidence of Iran's decision to make a nuclear weapon or to go ahead beyond the range of its civil program in a serious way directed toward that effort, and there would be, as Jim said, evidence of that, then we think there would be a lesser, but no way minimal, international reaction along the lines that I described. Read the report. It has not only what I just told you, but it has an interesting primer that elaborates the very valuable information that Jim provided to you. And then the end notes, which have been put together with great care, they will tell you the basis for our decisions. It's important because in many ways, some of the information here, I think, is now collated in a way that's entirely new. So thank you for attention, and now we will turn to your questions and my colleagues' answers. Thank you very much. I believe there are microphones on either side of the aisle, and if you'll raise your hand, I will recognize you and the microphone will come. Questions should be short and succinct, and I will use my great authority as the chairman up here to shut you down if in fact you intend to give a speech. Please, right here, the first question, and tell us please who you are and who you might represent.
Thank you. My name is Matthew Ogden. I work with Executive Intelligence Review magazine, and I would like to commend you on this event and give my gratitude to the efforts that you put into this report. Two elements I just want to bring into the discussion. Number one, you may or may not know that Representative Walter Jones from North Carolina has issued a House Concurrent Resolution number 107 expressing his sentiment that the United States Congress has the sole responsibility to declare war, and any efforts by the White House to circumvent the authority of Congress would be considered impeachable offense. This is obviously
okay,
what happened.
Would you please roll on to your second point and then give us the question? We're all ears.
Thank you. Second point. I think that the statements that General Dempsey of the Joint Chiefs of Staff made 2 weeks ago in London resonate very much with what you guys have said today in terms of trepidation around Iran, but also Syria. And thank you for saying what you said about the case of the tragic events in Libya over the last 24 hours, showing how fragile and how much an escalation, unintended escalation would come from this, not only in the case of Iran, but also Syria, which I believe would put us into a confrontation with Russia and China. So please comment on this, and if you have anything on Mr. Walter Jones's HCR 107, I'd appreciate comment on that.
Yeah, Frank?
Well, I think, and you're probably going to get this as a frequent answer over the next 20 minutes, so it's good to get used to it now. That's really outside the purview of the report. In that, you know, obviously for decades on, there's been a struggle between Congress, who has the right to declare war, and the executive. And we've seen those play out between Republican and Democratic Congresses and presidents. And I doubt I have anything to add to that, other than I'm sure they'll work it out or they won't work it out. But I have no special knowledge of that. We're, as you can tell, the focus here is hopefully to generate a serious conversation before Congress authorizes war or the president takes that action. Because right now I think a large number of us are dissatisfied with the quality of that conversation. It seems to be fact-free and partisan and not very nuanced, not very admitting that there are serious disagreements about some of the data, and then in other areas there's consensus. And so I would look at this as a document that gets us ready for what you were talking about might or could happen at a later point.
Frank, any comment?
You know, I think we've got a very informed chairman right now in General Dempsey, both the acting commander of Central Command previously and the deputy commander at Central Command a lot of time in the region, and had the opportunity to talk to many of the regional leaders. And I think he brings a war experienced base to this, and Central Command has done yeoman's work on building plans and looking at this challenge over the last 5 to 7 years that I had been associated with him. And so it has been looked at with great detail, and he understands that. So he's very, very well aware of what our capabilities are, what we can do, and how long it would take to do that. So he's an informed player in this debate.
Next question. Please, the gentleman back here on the right-hand side.
Greg Thielman, Arms Control Association. The George W. Bush administration changed the U.S. military doctrine in 2002, introducing the idea of preventive attacks against countries that hadn't attacked anyone, but because of capabilities or a posture that might mean they would attack them in the future. I gather we're talking about such an attack, and I just wondered whether your costs included the impact for the world on international law of a principle which still doesn't seem to be accepted as legitimate under the UN Charter.
Why don't you take that?
I would say the following, Greg. I think it's a very important and very useful question. Under the UN Charter, there are only two ways to go to war. We haven't accepted that, although we're members of the Charter. But the two ways are self-defense, with a somewhat enlarged envelope for that, and a look, at least in recent years, at something that might be called preventive, or maybe even preemptive, but it's a very muddy area, as you point out, and a very uncertain one. And the other is action by the Security Council. Our view in the report is that were there to be clear evidence, and that seems to be the direction in which the president is going, that would justify, in his belief, the use of military force to deal with an Iranian weapons program, then we believe there would be less, as I said a moment ago from the podium, perhaps negative reaction to that in various parts of the world. But we don't judge that there would necessarily be easy or facile or maybe even possible to get a Security Council resolution in favor of such action, which would leave the United States and maybe friends and allies to decide how to act on their own with regard to this particular question. So it raises an important conundrum. We're members of the Security Council. We're certainly major players in the international community. And over the years, we have tended to take, particularly other people's wars that we don't like, the view that there are restrictions on the use of force. And so it raises this quandary. We have not argued this position in the report beyond what I gave you. We're leaving people to make their own judgments. The legal issues, I think, will be argued out by others. We have not done that, and we made it clear that that was not our intention. Yes, sir, down here. Have to get the left side of the audience for some political balance. Well, I'm looking for
Thank you. I'm Mike Amate at the Open Society Foundations. Your report doesn't specify U.S. military action, and given the relevance of this discussion in Israel as well, I'm just wondering if you plan to have similarly broader discussion in Israel or working with colleagues.
Yeah, I think you meant to say the report doesn't specify Israeli military action because it is totally devoted to, in my view, to U.S. military action. But you'll find after the discussion of benefits as a result of U.S. action, the 4-year setback, you will find a judgment, as I gave it a moment ago, of the potential for Israel for a 2-year setback. I would like nothing more to go to Israel. I used to live there and talk about this report, but so far the invitations haven't been forthcoming. But I would certainly hope and expect they will be.
I would just add parenthetically that Haaretz carried the was it AP
Yeah.
article, so I expect it to generate some conversation there. And of course, we would, welcome. There's more than one player that could be involved here, and so all the players should have a serious conversation about costs and benefits, and their public should have that. And so if we can be helpful with that, we would, of course, like to do that.
I think it's fair to say, without involving any gross violations of secrecy, that we did take the advantage of trying to give our friends in Israel an earlier than today's look at the report, if I could put it that way. How about some female questions?
In the middle.
Diversity.
In the middle, right there.
Right there, the lady in the middle. Thank you very much.
Jennifer Sanderson, Crisis Action. I was just wondering what you think the likelihood is that Israel might launch a unilateral strike before the end of the year.
Hey, Walsh.
Okay. Like I think everyone on this stage, I've been at this for over a decade. I remember in 2000 or early 2000s, I made a bet with a friend of mine, a six-pack of beer. He said Israel was going to strike this year because, you know, it's sort of like the changing of the seasons. Israel comes out and threatens a military strike. We bet a six-pack of beer. I felt bad. I didn't want to make him pay. So I said double or nothing. And now he owes me a brewery. And but I will say this. This year has felt different than previous years. I've been a long-time skeptic. And when you look at it at the numbers, it doesn't seem like it's a real feasible option. And certainly there are political incentives for Israel to raise this as a possibility, to discipline the talks and to put pressure on its friends. Still, I've talked to many people, senior in the U.S. government, who believe this is a real possibility. It certainly has a different look and feel about it. So I think it's more unlikely than likely, but I think that likelihood is higher this year than it's been in the past.
In 2006, I visited Israel and had the opportunity to have a briefing from the head of military intelligence. And he said, of course, our conclusion is that in 1 year, Iran will have a nuclear weapon. I said, well, General, that was your view 4 years ago. And he said, yeah, it's still our view today. And of course, it's still Israel's view. They have been unwavering in their commitment to the 1 year time deadline. And someday, like a stopped clock, they may be right if we don't act. Yes, sir, down here.
Lars Hansen, with myself. In having looked through this report quickly before this began, it looks to me, and from the comments here, it looks to me like if somebody says the end state or the end goal, the decided goal is to stop Iran from developing a nuclear weapon, that can't be done. At most, anybody is talking about is delay. So the question that comes in looking at, and I happen to agree with that assessment, by the way, in looking at this then, what would be a reasonable goal to set in order to then decide what policy and what actions you're going to take?
That's yours, Jim or Frank?
Oh, well, nice to try to dump that on me. I'm not going to be able to give you a full direct answer on that. Let me take one small piece of that. You heard me say that the DNI, the highest intelligence official in the United States of America, has testified or has written that Iran has a capacity to develop nuclear weapons and that it's a matter of a political will to do so. And that, you know, we've talked about not being able to bomb the knowledge out of their heads. I will say, though, as someone who's studied nuclear programs, and most people probably don't know, you know, we know the countries that got nuclear weapons, but there were 3 times as many countries that started down the path towards nuclear weapons and stopped in a reverse course. We've actually had tremendous success in preventing the spread of nuclear weapons. All the predictions about dozens of nuclear weapon states did not come true. Delay can be a useful piece of that. You know, delay, things happen, you know, earthquakes, regime changes, border wars, and so delay can be useful. So you can imagine a scenario in which 4 years might be contributory to a non-nuclear outcome. But it's also true that if they haven't made a decision and then you attack them, you might very well get that as a decision. And I think there's evidence around Osirak that it had that effect. But it's not a clear judgment. There are going to be different points of view here. That's my point of view. So it's not as if delay has no value, but it depends on the context and the country that you're dealing with. And my own sense of it is that Iran is a little more, I got to be careful with this word here. You know, they're like the U.S., they're a prideful country, they're a proud country, they have a long and ancient civilization. I think there's more likely to be a strong response than a whimpering response.
Frank, any?
Yeah, I think it's critical that we understand that regardless of what we think the potential outcome can be, we need to maintain readiness to do those things and be in a posture to be able to deal with an unexpected trigger, to react to another nation taking action. And we need to have a debate that is public enough and clear enough that the capability that we have and the intentions we have are unambiguous and achievable. The strength that comes from power and allowing political dialogue and debate and to shape things is unquestionable and something we need to make sure that is out on the table. So the debate is important. The continuing debate is important, regardless of how long we've been in the minds of some 1 year out from executing the program. That's a key piece of why I'm sitting here today, is I think we need to have that alive and well. And many times, people don't want to have the hard conversations. The hard conversations are as much as part of deterrence as action is.
Just one factual correction. The predicate for your question was wrong. We don't say that there's no way to stop an Iranian program. What we say is that that particular kind of military action would imply occupation, boots on the ground, and levels of forces that would exceed Iraq and Afghanistan combined. You make your own decision about the public appetite, but that's not a question we ventured further on. Yes, sir, down here.
You get a microphone.
You can use your smartphone, but it won't work in here on the
I'm a
public address
lecturer
system.
on Iran. In 2003, when our boots hit the ground in Iraq, it was clear across the board that Iran did everything in terms of what you would think would be a rational move to stop the United States and agree to many of our requests across the board. What's different today? Why, if something happens, for example, Parchin has that pink tarp, why would they be cleaning it up if it were not their intent after the elections to settle up? The awesome power presented by the United States, its allies, between the 16th and 27th, 25 nations will undergo a naval exercise. It isn't just the United States, not just Israel, but quite a bit of potential. I would pursue. What is your view that this awesome degree of power focused in, plus covert, plus the fact the Green Movement indicates that things are not doing very well, plus sanctions, that a country like Iran can continue to be so obstructionist?
I'll take parts of it. I'm glad you raised that. You're absolutely right, and people forget when they talk about diplomacy having failed or run its course that we did have success. We were able to have that. Iran suspended its program for 2 years then. There's some debate about the sequence of events.
Suspended enrichment.
Suspended enrichment, yes.
The question of military activities is still suspended.
Yes. Well, yes, and that's a longer, but yes. But I mean, to point to the fact that, I mean, our core focus is primarily enrichment, and they did suspend enrichment for 2 years. There's some debate about whether U.S. intervention in Iraq was a direct or secondary contributor to that. There's a timeline there, and I'm not going to go into it. But it does show that there are possibilities there. The power thing, I think, works both ways. On the one hand, you know, the Iranians are not irrational. There are very few suicidal states in the international system. And they have behaved rationally over time. But the power thing can also scare people if they think what your policy is regime change. So it cuts both ways. And if they perceive you as gathering all this power in order to put you out of business, then that can create a different dynamic. The final thing I would say about Parchin, I don't know if you saw it last week, there was a document released by the National Security Archive. It was the document released by the CIA that they published, of the CIA going back and saying, what did we get wrong about Iraq? Which I thought was a very healthy thing. And one of the things they talk about, which resonates today with Parchin, is Iraq went about sanitizing all its sites, not letting IAEA in, trying to cover up the fact that it once had a program, because they didn't want to be found guilty of that. But to us, it looked like they were hiding and cheating and had intentions to do more. And so the Parchin site is mostly about activities that took place prior to 2003. And then when they asked to see it, then all of a sudden you see this flurry of activity and cleanup activity. So, you know, I think there are similarities and important differences in comparing Iran and Iraq here. But I will at least put out on the table that Iraq, I think, engaged in military-related activities prior to 2003. I follow the DNI on that. And that means they probably don't want to admit that to the whole world, so they're probably going to hide that. And I sort of agree with your intuition that you could say it's bad that they're hiding it, but you could also say it's good that they're trying to get this cleaned up, clean the slate, so that in a post-election period, perhaps serious discussions could go on. I think both those are possibilities, but people don't treat them with equal likelihood.
Yes, Molly?
Thank you, Molly Williamson, Middle East Institute. A question as to the costs. We are looking at unprecedented debt, not only domestically but internationally. Global efforts at economic recovery are fragile at best. How do you, or does the report look at the economic implications globally to military action?
Yeah, perhaps let me start out with that and say that we make it clear in an early part of the evaluation of costs that while we didn't attempt to evaluate the costs of a sustained military attack, either an initial attack or, if necessary, follow-on attacks, we said it could be considerable. And I think our experience in recent wars gives you a kind of per-day cost or a per-week or per-month cost for that kind of sustained action. We also felt it was very important to take a look at two other elements of cost. Direct impact on oil price, which we didn't attempt to come to figures, but it's very clear that the people who work the oil patch are very jittery. And so a combination of uncertainties in itself already quickly moves the price. And indeed, the price is rapid to move up and very slow to come down. But the second question is how that oil price increase could be destabilizing to the efforts to try to recover, recognizing that energy remains a large and significant cost, particularly in manufacturing countries, of what will be, in effect, efforts to try to recover through the creation of jobs in the manufacturing sector. And if, in fact, it forces prices up, it's going to drop consumer interests and consumption. And all of those, I think, will play back into the global economic system in a real way, and they can't be ignored. Our view was that it is very hard to make concrete predictions, but it is not very hard to indicate the chain of events and how they may impact that kind of a question. Folks?
No, I think you hit it perfectly. I mean, the key piece is that's why we have the debate. It's so that we can take a look at those hard costs that are known out there that are going to be variables in the equation of political decisions by different states to support this. I think it's important to make sure that we always realize that there's multiple elements of power at play all the time and they play off of each other. And that's why it's important to know the end states, not just militarily, but politically. Where does the nation want to go? Where does the world want to go? And then what are the most important things that we have to consider in having that debate? Whereas we can get on the slippery slope or the zip line to a strike option to do something, but you want to make sure that we've moved through all that. It's become very, very clear to people, but China in particular, who uses a tremendous amount of oil for their manufacturing program and who needs it, who is affected by the flow and the price. And so there's a lot at play there when you bring military power and an increasing likelihood of that as an option because other elements are playing. You begin to provide opportunity for the other elements of power to come into play and solve the problem before military power is executed.
Yes, over here.
I'm Alan Kieswetter with CNO Resources, and I have a question, I think, for General Kearney. It's about the Israeli zone of immunity. Two questions. What about the argument that the zone of immunity is not so narrow or not so quick because the Israelis retain the capacity to bomb the entrances and, in essence, make the facilities unusable? And secondly, what are the arguments pro and con for the U.S. providing super bunker busters that could also extend the time of zone of immunity?
Thanks, Alan. Frank?
Well, first off, I think you're right. There are intermediate steps that can occur to delay for periods of time access to the facilities that are out there and to do damage. And I think that's what we try to get at that in that period where the Israelis can have less of an effect. I think the key effect becomes once they can affect LEU movement to HEU to WGU, that we still can. And so you take a look at the other pieces of making a reliable delivery system, warhead, we have extra time in the equation. So it's the relative difference in time that I think makes them uneasy. The option to provide weapons and ordnance that allow them to get at other things, I mean, that's an option. That's a political decision about the use of a military tool to achieve an end state. I don't think that's a military decision. So I would say if that's the way we want to go, that adds another variable into the equation in their capability to do things unilaterally. That probably is measuring the decision and the debate on whether or not that should occur.
Yeah, just a factual question, Alan. I asked that question of our friends and colleagues in the strategic arena, noticing that the most capable Israeli aircraft, probably the F-15, had a 26,000-pound lift capacity. The large bomb is a 30,000-pounder, and so even maybe the Israelis can juice it up a little bit, but I don't know whether they can make it all the way with that one. Yes, sir, in the center.
I'm Jordan Harms. I'm an intern at Woodrow Wilson Center. The one thing that is really nagging at my mind over all of this is how Russia factors into all of this, regardless of what policy we take. Russia is the primary supplier to Iran for equipment, for enriching uranium, and for technology for building a nuclear bomb. And needless to say, they still have a place on the Security Council at the United Nations. So whatever policy we take, Russia is going to be involved. So I wanted to pose to you, if we do decide to take a military action against Iran, how will Russia factor into all of this?
Well, let me take a shot at that. I think the conclusion that Russia's a supplier of enrichment material isn't borne out by the circumstances. I think the Koreans have perhaps been the closest to the Iranians in the nuclear regime. That the Russians so far seem to be defending their non-proliferation credentials and their non-proliferation position. The real question for the Russians, and it's the one that I tried to answer earlier when I talked about could we expect, even under the best of circumstances, which is clear evidence of an Iranian decision to go, Russian support for Security Council action. And I said I was skeptical about that because the Russians have taken a kind of standard position against that. And perhaps a little bit in the once burned, twice shy category over Libya. But this is not a Libya, and Libya was not in a direct way, in any serious way, a nuclear weapon question. So I think the question out there is still the question. Our sense in the report was that it was tilted against being able to get Security Council action.
Can I just add an addendum, just because I have the opportunity? You know, we have, slip that right in. You know, there's often a discussion about a state becoming nuclear, which I don't want any more nuclear weapon states, and then those states transferring nuclear materials or technologies to third parties. And, you know, will this state do that? Will that state do that? And my answer is, on the list of top 5 nuclear exporters of sensitive nuclear technology, Pakistan is number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, and number 5. No one has done more to undermine the state of the non-proliferation regime than AQCON's network and its export of sensitive nuclear technology.
Yes, down here.
We want more female hands.
We want more female
questions. Which is an odd sentence.
Questions.
Questions. We want questions, not hands.
No one ever said you were socially skilled.
I know. What? How much time do we have left in this thing?
Please go ahead. Don't let this chatter disturb you.
Oh, is there a question?
Yeah, Midshipman Hussein Shawish from the U.S. Naval Academy. Sir, my question has 2 points. Do you think the Syrian turmoil has anything to do with accelerating any action against Iran, whether by us or by Israel? And how much, if we end up attacking Iran, would this affect our relationship with China relating to oil specifically?
We don't discuss the question in a direct sense in the report, except to say that perhaps in the area of Hezbollah retaliating against us in Israel, the uncertainty in Syria may reduce both some of their capability in a longer-term logistical sense, because they get fed by Iran through Syria, and maybe as a result make the Hezbollah effort a little less effective than it might have been had Syria been there, operating, functioning fully behind them. And so I think that point is out there. Remind me your second point? China. We didn't go into this in any detail, and I think in that sense, I think you could conclude we did not feel that this was a major issue, but we thought that on the question of a potential Security Council decision, China would, as it has in Syria, continue to sail with but behind the Russians on that particular issue. Over here. We'll take two more.
Actually, my question, my name is Marshall Miller. I guess I've always attended Woodrow Wilson functions, and I'm a flyboy from World War II, Navy. I have questions with regards to our initial attack, if it comes to that, on Iran, and you're saying we want to put boots in afterwards. I heard this a few years ago from our administration, and it lasted for numerous years. We're not looking for numerous years to be in another country, I would say.
Frank, you want to answer that?
Yes, sir. First off, thank you for your service. I mean, it's wonderful to have part of the greatest generation here with us, and I'm glad you're remaining involved. I would say that if we said something that would indicate that we are for putting boots on the ground, then we have misspoken, and I don't think we have. I mean, this is largely an air and missile campaign designed to actually degrade the facilities and the storage facilities and the capabilities to retaliate that we would be involved in to achieve certain effects to be able to get the job done. I think the discussion on boots on the ground came as if you wanted to actually change the mind of the regime or move the regime out. It normally is not going to be accomplished through just a few of the services providing capabilities. We would probably need to be there for a longer time with a force on the ground to be able to achieve that event, and it would be a challenge.
Thanks, Frank. In appreciation for your attendance, we'll take just two more questions, and thank you all for coming and for the quality of the questions we've got. I'll take one up here on the gentleman on the far right.
Dave Ottaway at the Woodrow Wilson Center. I'm wondering if you all made an assessment of the probability or likelihood that the United States will inevitably get involved if the Israelis attempt a unilateral strike, because they will not be able to accomplish it or they'll get into trouble and the U.S. will inevitably get involved. Is it possible to have a purely unilateral Israeli operation without the Americans getting involved?
I'm sure you're going to want to address this. I can give a short answer, and the answer would be yes. That's what happened with Syria when the U.S. asked President Bush to come in with Israel when they bombed the Syrian reactor, and President Bush said no. So it's at least theoretically and empirically possible. But do you have?
I don't disagree that it is possible. I'm not so sure that we would not wait and see what the effects were and what the retaliation was and the response from Iran. Certainly it would heighten our alert and our readiness, and it would make the task to finish the job potentially more costly.
And I would have to tell you that the debate I hear around this particular issue doesn't exclude the possibility of the need for a cleanup. Final question right down here, please, sir.
Thank you very much for such a great panel. My name is Behnam. I'm an intern with the Wisconsin Project on Nuclear Arms Control.
Flattery will get you everywhere, Ben. Go ahead with your question.
Thank you. General, in the beginning of your comments, you mentioned in passing cyber war, or cyber as an option. I was wondering what role did cyber play in driving the analysis of this report, either in terms of Stuxnet or U.S. capability in general, or even Iranian retaliatory capability?
I don't think we explored cyber purposefully in this. It's a domain in which capabilities are cloaked under different titles and what we want to be able to do and how we would do them. But frankly, when you get into integrated air defense and command and control communication systems, there are opportunities there to use those to do things. And that was where my comments are.
Thanks, Frank. Before I thank you all, let me just say that we recognize that this report is narrowly constrained. We recognize that this report is unusual in Washington. Anybody here want to stand up and say they've seen a report that makes no recommendations in Washington? The important questions that are still outstanding are very much in our minds. And without being specific, we hope that we will be able to take another look at another report in the very near future at such issues as other measures and how they might fit. So stay tuned, watch this space. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you for your participation and your excellent questions.